Hello, and welcome to today's Health IT Security webcast, sponsored by OutSystems and Paragon, self-service apps beyond the EMR, accelerating CX gains with low code. I am Vanessa Palmer-Desiato, Project Manager at Xtelligent Healthcare Media and moderator of today's webcast. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, OutSystems and Paragon. Headquartered in Cleveland, Paragon is a premier customer research, digital strategy, design, and web solutions provider that leverages platforms like OutSystems to drive optimized customer experiences. Their services include customer journey mapping, usability, user experience design, web and mobile development, custom applications, and full lifecycle solutions to evolve your digital properties. We will begin with a presentation by our speaker and conclude with a question and answer segment. Audience members can submit questions at any time during the webcast using the question tool to the left of the screen. For all technical matters or difficulties, click the help icon at the bottom of the screen. A recording of this webcast will be made available following this presentation. With that, I would like to introduce our speaker, John Hours, CEO at Paragon. John, I'll now hand the floor to you.
Great, thanks, Vanessa. All right, so self-service apps beyond the EMR, accelerating CX gains with low code. That's a large title, and I suspect some of you are here to hear about self-service apps in healthcare. Others of you probably want to talk about customer experience, and hopefully some of you want to talk about low code also. We're going to do all those things today. Let me introduce myself. I doubt many of you are here to hear about me, so I'll keep this as short as I can. As Vanessa said, my name is John Hours, and my company Paragon has been building enterprise software for nearly 30 years now. We have strong practices in the healthcare space, including our strategy and experience group, which works for many large hospital systems and academic medical centers. We have a Sitecore web practice in support of that. And then, of course, a large amount of custom application development and business process automation, both the clinical and administrative sides in healthcare. So I want to set the stage with a couple of facts that are probably not surprising to anyone here that's involved in, with, or around healthcare IT. First of all, according to an OutSystems survey, and this was a study of about 3,300 IT professionals, 65% of organizations plan to deliver more than 10 applications per year. Nearly a third of those, by the way, 23%, plan to deliver more than 50 applications. Second fact is that Gartner tells us 83% of CIOs list lack of available talent as the #1 obstacle to achieving their objectives. And we're not just talking about internal talent, we're talking about internal talent and outsourced talent from firms like mine as well. Third fact, Deloitte tells us that healthcare budgets are growing, but inconsistently and slowly. They say that 55% of organizations report an increased IT budget over the previous year. And that number's been steady over the last 5 years. As they break that down, IT budgets, they tell us that 20% of the IT budget is spent on innovation. So only a fifth of it is spent on innovation, 24% on incremental change. So a total of maybe 44% pushing things forward. The remaining 56% simply on maintenance of applications that are out there. So what does this tell us? We're operating on the edge, right? And that's a good place to be. It's an efficient place to be. We're right on the tipping point. But most organizations, I'll say every organization, or every customer we have, is sitting on a longer backlog of good ideas than we can tackle with the available resources. And many of the ones that are left on the cutting room floor are innovation, consistent with what Forrester tells us. Some are incremental change. Some are even maintenance that gets deferred. But it works, and we move forward at some pace. And in healthcare, we move forward maybe more slowly than other industries because there are so many competing factors, and each of those has so many different variables, right? Maintenance versus improvement, customer expectations versus business constraints, global initiatives on one hand versus departmental concerns. Almost nothing's more departmental than a hospital system. Risk versus innovation. What am I allowed to do, and can I meet those customer expectations? And then, of course, the typical limited time and budget. So in that same OutSystems survey, we asked the question, OutSystems asked the question, how likely is it that your organization will be disrupted by external forces? If we take a look at the top line, you'll see that nearly 80%, the orange bar and the yellow bar, nearly 80% of the respondents said it was likely or somewhat likely that they would be disrupted by significant changes in consumer preference or behavior. Now, this whole survey was done prior to COVID, and of course, that 80% was proven correct. But what happens when the business or customer or the environment demands change like this? And we're already saturated with resources and money. What can we do to make up that gap? The only way to close it is we have to go faster. Okay? And needing to go faster continues to strain the discipline that we have in IT. We have to have a lot of discipline around our architecture, especially in a regulated industry. We have to have a lot of discipline around our architecture, around our security, compliance, governance, risk, all those things we have to manage. And the faster we have to go, the more tension there is between the management of those issues and the speed that we're trying to push. Disruption, as anticipated in that survey, disruption is common in healthcare. We see it all the time. And we see it due to regulatory issues and regulatory changes. We see it from PR crises. Everybody has them now and then. We see it from shifting service line priorities. We see it from market priorities and so forth. And we're living through one of the largest disruptions we could imagine right now. I promise you this isn't going to be a COVID presentation or some grandiose focus on new normal. We've all sat through those before. I don't intend to do another one. But things are changing, and they're going to continue to change even as we recover back to normal, because consumers like some aspects of what they've adapted to over the last year. And not only that, but they've learned to deal with more situations, more edge cases, right? How to do e-commerce returns. What if my item wasn't in the box that was shipped to me? How do I refund if I used a coupon, right? For the last year or so, call centers were slow or they were offline for much of the year. So we're finding that consumers' comfort level with digital self-service is increasing, right? And customers nowadays expect to have a digital self-service option, and they expect it to work as well or better than other channels. Even if it doesn't, even if they click in and the evidence is that this is not going to work or is not working, they're going to try to use it anyway. And I'll tell you a quick story, a quick personal story about that. I have my longtime doctor retired recently, a couple of years ago. And I have a friend who's practicing, and I saw him. I said, Scott, are you taking new patients? And Scott said to me, no, I'm not right now. And I explained my situation to him, and Scott said, well, I'll take you, John. I'll take you. So a couple of months ago, I had a condition I thought I should get checked out. And so I sat down and I Googled Scott's information, and I got his page at the local hospital. And it said request an appointment. So I clicked on request an appointment, and at the top of the page was a banner that said Dr. Scott is no longer accepting new patients. And of course I knew that because he told me that, but below it was a form that let me fill out my information. And so I filled out my information and hit submit and the date I wanted. And of course it came back with a message that said, you're not currently a patient of Dr. Scott's. And of course, on some level, I knew this was going to be the outcome. I mean, I build these systems, right? I see these systems, but I tried it anyway. And this was even with having a full array of options in front of me, like calling his office or perhaps just texting his cell phone, right? I still tried the channel anyway. In a lot of cases, we're finding that patients won't try any other channel at all. Consumers in general won't try any other channel at all. As we talk to people who are unvaccinated and we ask them, well, why have you not been vaccinated yet? You're the right age, you should be out there. And of course, we're vaccinating a lot of people in Ohio. They say, usually the answer we get, the most common answer is, well, I've been trying the website and waiting for it to say there's openings, waiting for an appointment. And so these people haven't called, they haven't asked around, they haven't checked the pharmacy, they haven't checked, with their friends. They just expect the tool to exist. They expect it to be complete and correct and authoritative. And that's really a tall order for us, especially when we have to move fast. So if we look at something like the mass vaccinations that are going on right now, and again, I offer this only as an example of a disruption. If we look earlier in my career, in the past, how would we have responded to something like this? We would have taken this challenge and probably hired more call center reps. We would have put more people in more chairs, maybe added some phone lines, would have developed a unique script, and we would have responded by taking more phone calls. Okay. And that would work because that was the same working mechanism we had. It was a familiar mechanism and we could just scale it up. But now that people are using digital channels for these sorts of disruptions, they're often brand new mechanisms, right? I can't patch your vaccine appointment into my Find a Doctor tool. I can't patch it into the Pay Your Bill tool. I can't patch it into the symptom checker, right? I need to build this again. So how do we do that fast enough? How do we get there quickly enough? And this whole trend is accelerating. It's moving really from consumers expecting these things to actually preferring these things. And some of that's a generational change as we see generations move through. And some of it is from the COVID change agent. One thing we're finding really interesting with our current customer is that attempts we've made in the past to do digital self-service that have failed. So self-service that we put in the name of efficiency or in the name of cost control, things that had failed in the past are now succeeding, even maybe in a slightly different form, right? So we're continuing to go down this digital self-service road very, very, very quickly, as quickly as we can with most of the customers. So we have to learn fast. We have to learn fast how to move fast, or at least faster than we normally do in healthcare, right? And the questions in front of us are, how do we build self-service tools quickly while minimizing trade-offs? Customer experience, bring a tool to market quickly with a customer experience that is useful and actually satisfies consumers. We're going to talk more about experience as we go through here. How do we deal with things we can't compromise, like architecture and security and governance and compliance? We have to check those boxes or we can't get to production. And how do we establish a baseline risk profile for a new system? How is the system going to behave in production? How is it going to be treated by compliance? How is it going to be treated by InfoSec? Those can be long processes. How do we get through those? Again, things we can't trade off. And then once we get it there to production, how do we evolve these self-service tools quickly once we get there? How do we extend the ones that are successful? How do we extend those paradigms to other areas of the organization or to other practices we have? How do we react to customer feedback and problems? And how do we even gather that feedback so we can react to it? And then ultimately, how do we optimize this, the organizational fulfillment process, the things we're doing on the backside to try and service all those requests that are coming in from the front end? Those are big challenges for us. One possible answer, and the one we're going to talk about today, and the one we've been very successful with, is low-code development. Gartner tells us that low-code will be responsible for more than 65% of application development by 2024. And certainly the trends that we see and the trends that OutSystems sees would suggest that that's absolutely correct. The adoption of low-code across all industries is very, very rapid. Let's talk a minute now about what is low-code development. And we're not going to dive really deeply on the tooling in this presentation. This is not meant to be a demo or a sales pitch or anything for low-code. It's a big topic, and there's a lot of things involved in the platforms. There's a lot of information available about it. So I'm happy to work with any of you who want to go deeper on the tools and their capabilities and how they work. I'm happy to work with any of you offline. But to at least frame the discussion, I want to give you an idea of what's involved. There are a number of modern tools available. And the screenshot you see right here is taken from OutSystems, which is one of them. And in full disclosure, as Vanessa said, OutSystems is a partner of Paragon's, and it's our platform of choice for this type of work. It's not the only one, though, and each tool takes a slightly different spin on how it works and where the boundaries are between automation and custom code. But in general, what you can expect from a low-code development environment, first of all, is a visual development environment. So it's going to contain drag and drop either into a mobile experience or into a web experience of components, some of which we will have built and some of which are provided right out of the box. And it's going to provide drag and drop logic, which is going to look something like a flow chart, a decision tree of logic that supports actions to the components that you see on the screen. Every environment is also going to contain some level of data abstraction, so some bit of data modeling we can do either on brand new data sources or on data sources that already exist in the organization. Our ability to issue queries to store data in and out of those data stores. It's going to contain some sort of lifecycle management, and lifecycle management is a big topic. I pulled out debugging and deployment, but a lot of DevOps topics are considered inside of most low-code deployment environments. And then they're almost all going to have package connectors, ways that we can interact with commercial systems that either exist around our ecosystem or around the web in general that we may want to interact with, including some security systems. All of that, we're going to be able to use all of that, of course, and then extend it with custom development, hence the term low code. All right, so how does this help us during a disruption? When we are disrupted, how does having a tool like this help? Well, we know we have to move fast. And so having some things available to us ahead of time certainly accelerates whatever activities we're doing. First of all, once we have a low-code platform in place, we'll have brand standards and UX paradigms that are already implemented. We'll have some of our visual design implemented. We'll have some of our the ways we like to interact with consumers, the things that test well, already there and built for us, and we can use those. We'll have a modern opinionated architecture in place. Again, one of the things we can't compromise as we try to go fast. And our low-code tool is going to be opinionated, but it's going to be a modern architecture that's going to work. And once we've vetted that and put it in place, we can leverage it app after app after app. A lot of the operational challenges are already solved. The ways that we take the care and feeding, so to speak, of the platform that we put in place. We don't have to deal with care and feeding of a brand new system or of a brand new set of componentry. Ease of reuse from other apps. So if we're trying to move fast right now and we've done something similar recently, we can pull some of the same componentry we've used before into this application and roll forward with it. And then I talked about risk baseline. Of course, the risk profile is understood once the platform's in place. And that really limits the surface area of what we have to look at and what we have to talk about with other stakeholders. So all those things together, what do they yield us? They yield us, number one, faster time to market. That's what we're after. Less effort is faster time to market. Number two, it's a less disruptive effort. So our disruption is becoming less disruptive, right? We can lean a little less on legal and compliance. We can lean a little less on our network operations. We can lean a little less on our information security. We can lean a little less on everybody involved around. We lean a little less on marketing. And then ultimately, we can build a higher confidence product than we would on a similar timeline as we try to push something, get something quickly to production. And all three of those things are helpful in a disruption, critical in a disruption. They're also helpful when we're not disrupted. Because as we said earlier, we're often running at full bandwidth. And these are desirable outcomes really no matter where we are. We can squeeze more juice from the orange, so to speak, if we're moving faster. We can squeeze more out of our backlog. And apps that might not otherwise have an apparent ROI, or things that might not otherwise see the light of day that are deeper in the backlog, can pop out when there's evidence that they should be worked on. If we choose to work on them, we can work on more. All right? So now let's talk about low code in healthcare specifically, right? I mean, there's lots of benefits to getting features to market quickly, right? We can decrease customer service time, enhance operational efficiency, raise the bottom line, build loyalty, all the things we talk about being fast to market. And it's true across all industries. But why in healthcare specifically does this make sense? Well, first of all, frequent disruption. We talked about that already. And when we're disrupted, it can cut deep. It can cut across many systems and many departments, many operations. Second of all, growing expectations of consumers. So we've already talked a little bit about the expectation that we'll provide these self-service tools, but really the consumer expectation is somewhat higher than that. The consumer expects that scheduling a class should look like Eventbrite, that making an appointment should work like Gmail, right? They expect these things to be simple and connected and communicative. They expect us to handle all the edge cases, all the messaging, all the error messages. We don't, in healthcare, we don't even often have an off-the-shelf system that's doing some of that work for us, like an e-commerce system or like a CRM system. So we're doing a lot of that custom. And a result of that is that we traditionally have heavy customized code bases. We build a lot of this stuff. And heavy code bases tend to lead to high maintenance levels and high bug levels. We said earlier that 56% of healthcare IT spending goes to maintenance. And we can't really get away from that. Some of that's what makes us different. But we can separate out the unique stuff and leave some of these more menial tasks, data storage, data retrieval, data presentation, to the platform itself. And when we do that, we can focus on the logic, the integration, and really most importantly, the experience, and make sure that we get those things right. If we get those right, that leaves us less code, but the most important code that we need to own and operate. Okay? Difficult to quantify ROI for non-clinical projects. Sometimes we have to get things into the market to understand if it's working. We expect an ROI, we anticipate an ROI, but we've got to get it there, and then we've got to iterate once we get there. Prior art, lack of prior art. So, and this is a difficult topic in healthcare. Sometimes it feels like healthcare is inventing a paradigm all at once across the whole industry. For example, telehealth. Everyone sees that coming. Everybody knows it's coming. Everybody has a different take on it. Exactly how is scheduling going to work? How are waiting rooms going to work? How are appointments going to work? And so it's sort of this more concurrent evolution in healthcare than it is a leader and a lot of followers like you'd have, say, with Amazon and e-commerce. It's not always true, but it's often true. And what that tends to mean is that we take our shot at it. And then as consensus builds through the industry, we probably didn't hit the target right in the middle. So we either fail that effort and move on, or we try to evolve towards what consumers are expecting. And having a tool like a low-code tool that lets us iterate quickly helps us get there. We're throwing away less and we're iterating more, and we're getting closer to where the industry is faster. That keeps us at the front. The next point, accumulation of departmental technical debt. This almost doesn't require any words at all with a healthcare audience. Departments are often funded separately. They often undertake initiatives on their own, and they can build up a lot of unmanaged technical debt, right? A lot of that goes relatively unmaintained. It eventually has to be addressed, and it's often addressed by IT and brought back in. The fact is, the more efficient we are, the more of those we can service. The more guardrails we can put around them, the more of them we can service. The more structure we can give them, the more we can service faster. Many business functions underserved by technology, underserved, again, because of long queues, deep backlogs, competing priorities. And then finally, customer experience beyond the EMR is inconsistent if it exists. And that's true. We probably, already have, your organization probably already has two completely distinct experiences, one on the EMR, one on the website. You may have a different one for financial services. You may have a different one for physicians. You may have different logins across these things. You may have different navigation. We probably have somewhat different look and feel. These are things that in the modern world are unexpected and really increasingly unacceptable. We're seeing our largest customers right now try to unify these things and maybe take a broader look at the experience ecosystem. What we need tooling, that prevents us from having to reinvent the wheel each and every time we need to add functionality. We certainly don't want to be reinventing the wheel, and we don't want to be reinventing quickly. That's where we'll start to compound the problems. So on the slide you see now, the last point there on experience brings me to this quote by Heather Cox from Humana. And Heather says that differentiating on price isn't going to be the way to win in healthcare. Differentiating on experience will be. And this is true. We need to, in my opinion, in my experience, this is true. We need to have tools in our ecosystem that allow us to rapidly create experiences, in line with what consumers expect, that'll work to solve their problems. We can't continue to fall back on the call centers. We can't continue to fall back on paper forms or departmental processes. Consumers just increasingly won't use them. And we're seeing that today. We're going to see more and more of it in the future for sure. All right, so let's talk a little bit about low-hanging fruit. These are areas that probably aren't served by your EMR. They may be. And they maybe haven't had the attention they deserve from IT. Obviously, this is going to be different in your organization. But what I'll call these is trends we see in our customers. These are typical soft spots, in areas where low code or a more rapid development process may help you get there. First, provider self-service. So credentialing and profiles. We see a lot of organizations struggle in this area. As a provider, what languages do you speak? What are your areas of interest? What are your hours in the office? The better I can do getting those things bringing those into organizational knowledge, the better I can do providing them out to consumers. Community outreach, is a sideline for some, but vitally critical for others. How do I collect data from the community, services and assessments, and make sure that I'm pointing my offerings in the right area, in the right direction. Classes and events, something that almost nobody does well. Some people don't do it all. Registration, scheduling, and feedback. Things like maternity classes, things like community events. All very well solved with low code, and very well is a good tool to patch up some of those processes, even if you do have a more integrated system. Patient pre-op and patient outcomes, certainly areas that might be in the EMR often aren't. Things like checklists and surveys and self-reporting as to how you are or aren't feeling or are or aren't emerging from a particular procedure, well solved on the clinical side. Scheduling and resource management, that's an internal efficiency play, or an internal efficiency or operational play that will necessarily affect somebody's experience when they're in person, in our facilities. Financial services, a fairly obvious spot that is, often solved by some out-of-the-box software and, maybe missing certain areas. Another excellent place to use low code to fill in some of those gaps or to implement some of those features that aren't currently online. Innovations, broad topic, and everybody has a different view of what innovations is and what they expect coming out of it. But innovation is always an area where we have, uncertain ROI and fast iteration. And then departmental technical debt, which we talked about already. All right, so I did promise in the overview that we would talk about some of the myths of low code. Some of you on this call who are longtime technologists or who are deeply involved in IT, this is not your first time to see or to hear of a low-code approach. And those of you who've been around as long as I have will remember other tools that have made similar claims over the last 25 or 30 years. The fourth-gen languages in the 90s, Visual Fox Pro, Visual Basic to some extent. the database platforms like Access and FileMaker. Some of these were aimed at developers. Some of them were aimed at what we now call citizen coders, which are sort of power users in the old days. And most of these things did not work well in the enterprise, or if they did, they only worked well in specific deployments or specific configurations. And often they were just a headache for developers. So I can't stress enough that really we're dealing with a new generation, a different set of tools here, modern tools that are really better equipped to deliver on the promises that we're making. All of the tools are different, but the following myths that I busted here, or tried to bust, are in general true for most of the popular modern platforms. Take a look at myth number 1: low-code apps don't scale. And this is maybe the myth that is the closest to true of all of them, right? But low-code apps will scale, and they will scale within reason for a business system, and they will certainly scale within reason for the kinds of use cases we're talking about in this presentation today. They may not be the right choice for certain things, like delivering lottery numbers, which have a huge spike when people want to see things right now, or Black Friday sales. But they will scale to any reasonable point that we see generally in healthcare systems. Also, kind of critical to say that they generally do not require building to scale. Okay, these run on standard cloud-based they run on standard cloud-based platforms. They use standard cloud-based scaling strategies. They use standard code and standard technology. So we generally don't have to build to scale. We can scale later because a lot of the parts that are built into the platform are already scalable. The authentication and the caching and the delivery and so forth. All right, myth number 2: low code is only for simple applications. It is true that the visual tools and logic builders have limits. So the screenshot I showed you earlier, you can certainly imagine, especially the developers on this call can imagine that, what the limits are to those. But the modern platforms encourage extensibility with standard code. This is why we call it low code and not no code. It really is the best of both worlds. We're going to use the tools that are provided to accelerate the areas that are repetitive, and we're going to use our coding skills to fill in all those gaps. All right, we're going to use regular modern coding languages like C#, Java, JavaScript in regular architectural paradigms to do that. We're just going to hook it in at the points where we need that custom logic. All right, myth number 3: low code means no reusability. And in fact, the opposite is true. A low-code platform will drive reusability in the organization, or at least throughout the applications that are on the platform. Everything you find in a low-code platform, and almost all of them, components, logic, code, data, all those things are all readily shared between projects. And it's always true that good architectural decisions will support that reusability. If we're good at breaking down the things that we think are going to be reused, it makes it easier to reuse them in the future. But certainly the platform in no way gets in the way of us reusing code from product to product. It's one of the things that makes us fast. Myth number 4: low code can't integrate existing systems and data. And that's a typical criticism of low code platforms. But the fact is that deploying a low code platform rarely requires us to rip and replace systems around it. The data modeling in the tools can be used to model existing data repositories. We can interact with those as though they were built with the platform itself. The integrations to things like back-end systems, things that have APIs or things that need to frequently be interacted with, maybe like the EMR itself, can be built and then reused the same way we build them and reuse them across our internal systems. In fact, we find that a number of systems that have been integrated on the same a number of custom systems that have already been integrated to a particular API will have code that we can use in a low-code environment to sort of port that integration over. And so all this allows us to work, a low-code tool into an environment and then, incrementally, selectively, opportunistically move applications onto that platform once it's in place. So myth 5: low code leads to shadow IT. And this one obviously is a major concern usually with IT leadership. If I put a platform like this in, I'm going to exacerbate the problems I have with departmental initiatives. We're going to start to build things outside of our purview. And so, what I want to emphasize here is that modern low code is not no code. I made that point a little bit ago. It's still going to require IT to build in a low code environment. Okay, app development is not usually delegated outside of IT with a low-code platform. And all the things that we have in place, source control and change and deployment controls and so forth, in custom applications will apply into a low-code environment as well. So we can prevent that type of proliferation across the organization, still control what our portfolio looks like, still control what we're putting out there, but yet still get the benefits of doing it quickly. All right, Myth 6, low-code solutions have a cookie-cutter UX. And we've talked a lot about UX and CX so far today. This can be true, okay? And with an inexperienced implementation, it may even often be true. But the fact is that low-code platforms, modern low-code platforms, allow us to use a stock front end, right out of the box that works acceptably well, or to have custom UX by deployment, custom UX pieces that can be drawn on by all the applications in the organization, or even custom by a particular app, an app that needs all of its own UX. And the standard development stacks that are there, like React, are easy to customize and fairly predictable from a developer standpoint. What we do find is that achieving pixel-perfect results can sometimes be challenging. And you see this in a lot of platforms, even like the SharePoints and so forth, where it can be difficult to get things exactly where you want them. But what we've found is organizations have adapted to that, and they generally prefer adherence to experience, achieving the experience, than adherence to design when they're forced to choose between those two. So we'll call that myth busted. And myth 7, low-code apps aren't secure. So this one here is going to depend largely on whether you pick a platform that your organization feels is secure. Our baseline security is going to be that of the platform itself and the componentry around it. But once we've convinced ourselves of that, then the security implementation in a low-code app is more consistent than you'll find in a custom application because we're leveraging the same tools and the same paradigms over and over again. We're able to host low-code deployments on private clouds, on private infrastructure, so we're not always bound to a vendor's cloud, which also allows us to extend whatever other network and security practices we have around our deployments to also be around the low-code app deployment. Myth 8, low-code is subject to vendor lock-in. So this is another major challenge, and this is one that is maybe got the most finesse of all the myths that we have to deal with. There are a lot of ways to get yourself into vendor lock-in in an IT environment. And if we depending how far we expand that definition, we could argue that databases are vendor lock-in. We could argue that tool sets and tool chains we use are vendor lock-in in some cases, except for the most diehard, maybe open source shops. But the fact is that low-code apps, as we build them, can run without the tools that created them. So what you saw was kind of a visual application builder there. The results of an exercise like we saw in that screenshot are going to be merged with code that we've written and compiled. And when those things are all together, we have an application that comes out the other end. That application can run without those pieces, in that case, OutSystems, without OutSystems platform needing to support it. They provide runtimes. Most vendors provide runtimes that can allow us to completely disconnect from the platform that created it. Now continued evolution of the system after that point still requires the vendor tooling. So to some extent, we are reliant on having the vendor tooling, but we can eject that application and use it in different contexts without being locked into that vendor ongoing. So we'll call that one busted as well. Myth number 9, low code is just a trend. And this is our final myth here. Markets and Markets presents us a fact that says global market estimated to be growing at 28% per year through 2025. That's consistent with a number of different surveys and a number of different analysis. The market continues to grow, and as Gartner said, the adoption continues to grow. Forrester tells us half the developers have adopted or are planning to adopt low code in some way, shape, or form. And finally, low code is fairly tightly linked to digital transformation. One of the things we found is that, as you go through a digital transformation exercise or an ongoing digital transformation program, it isn't enough for the customer just to transform the web channel. We see a lot of that, but as we go through the web channel, we're using CMS and DXP systems to rapidly iterate in marketing and trying to push messages faster and merge messages quickly and change messages. And we find that we have to be able to follow through with the tools and processes that support all those promises we're making, that support all the iteration and the pivoting that we're doing in marketing. And we need to be able to do it just as fast as we're doing to pivot that experience. So, we found low-code tools are required in some measure, or some sort of very rapid development paradigm is required to allow us to keep up with the speed of marketing right now. So if nothing else, we're going to need low-code tools there. Certainly we're going to see them as part of digital transformation. We're definitely not going to see them fall away as a trend. All right, so I do want to make sure we tell all sides of the story and leave enough room for questions here at the end. But there are some caveats to putting low code in the organization and to starting to rely on that as part of your process. And so I want to be clear first and foremost that the low code approach won't speed up requirements gathering. It won't speed up customer research. It won't speed up journey mapping, stakeholder buy-in, any of those things. There are ways to speed those up so they're more compatible with the low code development process. And you're going to want somebody experienced with that to help you through it if you haven't done it before. But we need to recognize that those activities exist. Those activities are going to happen at their own pace, and that we need to do them, right? We can't jump straight to development no matter how fast the iteration speed is. It's tempting when you get a low-code tool in front of you to just start building. I have an idea. I can make that idea start working, and so I start to use the tools to make that happen. Okay, and that suffers from the same problems. Building with low code suffers from the same problems as building with any code if you're building without direction. So we have to figure out how to move. We have to find ways to move along both our development and our requirements gathering activities at the same pace. And if you're in an agile or a lean development environment, you may find that you're going to need to change cadence. Some things are going to look different in your sprints. You may be at a different pace. You may be at a different order of things you're doing. But there are ways to bring that all together. So if you're not comfortable, from a project management standpoint or a program management standpoint, making those things happen, find help that is. Because you'll find that once these things come together, we actually can have a really efficient process that permeates all of the different activities happening, not just the code cranking aspects of the sprints. You will find that there are areas as you first come to a low-code platform that do need to change and adapt a little bit. Your DevOps around the low-code practices at least will look a little bit different. Your source control around the DevOps practices or around the low-code platforms will look a little bit different. Change management is going to be there, but it's going to look a little different. Deployment certainly is going to be different. So these processes need review, they need enhancement. But again, it's something we're going to do once as we put the platform in. It's not something we're going to do every single time we try to redeploy an application. All right, and then the final caveat, and the thing I want to leave you with here, which is really important, is that low code does not replace any role in your organization. Okay, low code's not an actor, it's a tool. All right, and it's tempting to say if I have this platform in place, I could have so-and-so who's a power user solve business processes. I could have so-and-so in marketing who generally handles user experience build more of the development. I could have my business analysts as they're gathering information start to lay the groundwork for dev. And the fact is that low code doesn't replace any of those things. It might shift a couple of boundaries, but for the most part, it's a tool that takes these talented practitioners in all of these areas, makes them faster, makes them more efficient, more accurate, more consistent, a lot of things, okay? But we need to have all of them at the table to make this work. And you can see my Venn diagram on the right-hand side sort of attempts to show that our low-code success is really at the intersection of all those things. I've got to have a modern, capable platform that's ready to do these tasks and that is not going to be subject to any of those 9 myths that we just looked at. I've got to still have strong developers because they're going to have to make good decisions. They're going to have to write a lot of code. A lower amount of code, but a lot of code. And I'm going to have strong UX because ultimately the product's going to succeed or fail based on how well we solve those consumer needs, all those things we talked about at the beginning, okay? So I need this talented, multifaceted team, as I said, to achieve the full benefits of the platform. And once you get that, once you get good people, you get a good platform in place, you will achieve good results for it, and you'll achieve good results faster. All right, so with that, I like to leave enough room for questions because usually we have a lot of them. I know I talked fast, and I do that a lot. There will be a recording available if you want to go back and look at it. But I want to make sure we get through everything we had. So questions, I guess, Vanessa, I'll let you lead that for us.
Sure, thank you for your presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A portion of the webcast. As a reminder, audience members can submit questions using the question tool to the left of the screen. So for your first question, developing low-code applications, both small and at the enterprise level, helps a lot during this unprecedented time. But certain old-school techniques, giving handwritten cards to people who arrive to get vaccinated, are also still in place. My understanding is both digitization as well as old-school methods are required at all times. Can you please share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is an excellent question because we see exactly this in implementation, right? We see that there's digital things at play, but there's also some of the old school techniques in place. And it really depends on, on what we're talking, where we're talking about and what the stage is in a particular organization. Let me take it in two different parts. First of all, in terms of the mass vaccines, which is what we're talking about, right? Specifically in the questions, why do we still have old school methods in place? In large part, for the reasons that we've talked about through this whole presentation, right? We have to solve the problems. We have to solve them quickly. And when there isn't a digital solution in place, we're going to fall back on what we have that we know we can do quickly and we know works. Also, I want to be clear that, when we talk about kind of the business process automation side of our business, that the right answer isn't always digital, okay? And it's a realization you come to, I think, after being in this business for a long time, that sometimes the right thing to do is just to roll your sleeves up and do it by hand. We find this a lot with things like content migration, where for a lot of years, a lot of people have struggled with automatically moving content from website to website or from system to system or health information and so forth. And there's a lot of pain to that, especially when the content is unstructured, and you're trying to parse things and figure out where the boundaries are and what is templated and what isn't and so forth. And you can spend hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours on big content migration projects. And, one thing we found over the time is sometimes the best answer to it is just to hire a bunch of temps that come in and type the content, or copy and paste the content. It's going to have to be reviewed anyway, so let's just move it over, let's review it, copy it in. Sometimes the old school technique really is the best answer. So I think there's a number of thoughts I have around this, but I think that in some cases we're using old school technology because we couldn't get there fast enough. QED proves my point. There it is. I think we've got examples of that. I think we've got examples where technology in general isn't the right answer to the problem at all. And the old school technique is the most efficient. And it's especially appropriate when we've got areas where we have control of the customer's attention or the consumer's attention already or the patient's attention already. Once I have them in my office, handing them a form to fill out, there's not much chance of them walking away from that. I have their attention, I have their engagement, they'll fill it out and they'll go forward. So I think sometimes it's just the best answer to the question, right? So hopefully that answers it for you. What else do we have, Vanessa?
Thank you, yeah. Should the low-code skills be in IT or closer to end-user departments or even in the user department?
It's a good question. That's a very good question. Most often we see them remain in IT. And the reason is, the honest reason is that it's often nerves from IT that cause those platforms to remain under IT control. There is a very real risk of proliferation as you start to push app development out to the edges, out to other parts of the organization. And there are kind of two schools of thought going on right now in this industry. One is low-code platforms, and the ones I'm looking at, ones like OutSystems that really rely more on code to get a finished process. Those things are almost always sitting in IT. They'll have some what they call citizen coder actors occasionally. Some very heavy power. Some structure or framework to something. But generally, citizen coders aren't a main actor in those. They can be, they aren't. And then you've got platforms that are out there that are billed more as actually no-code solutions. And these things, this gets a much fuzzier definition that sometimes includes things like Salesforce and SharePoint and so forth in that also, that are no-code that are really aimed more at citizen developers. And these things are form builders and survey builders and stuff like that. And those we do find closer to the departments or in the departments. And those things do suffer from that type of proliferation and sometimes deferred maintenance, and sometimes no maintenance, and sometimes no oversight, issues that we have. So I would say, to give you a more precise answer to this, I would say that in healthcare and in finance and in regulated industries, insurance, that I would recommend the low-code skills be under IT's purview. In other industries, I would be open to the idea that no-code solutions in certain scenarios solve certain problems, but I would caution the client very heavily against proliferation of unmanaged systems.
Thank you. Can you develop external custom platform applications that integrate with EMRs from the ground up using low-code?
External custom platform applications that integrate with EMRs. Yes. So our EMR integration is going to be is not found out of the box with any low-code system that I'm aware of. So your EMR integration is generally going to be a custom integration. It's going to be shareable across all your apps if we do it correctly. And custom platform applications, external custom platform applications, are exactly what we're aiming at with low code. We can have external users in the system interacting with it, and then traversing that integration to get the information from EMR. So if we want to build something that sits alongside a MyChart style product, that gathered, let's say, outcomes and had some information about procedures and treatment in it, yes, we could build that with low code.
Thank you. How does an organization integrate low code into your existing source control, such as GIT?
It's a great question, and it depends a little bit on the platform. So each platform has different approaches for this. A number of them will use built-in source control. So they, in the platform themselves, serialize the assets out and source control them. So you're essentially, getting and committing in the process, or in the platform itself. Others handle it by externalizing component by component. So, you have a particular component that then gets, is a bunch of entities all together that can get source controlled externally, and other ones do it application by application. So it depends a little bit by the platform, but it's obviously all solvable. I do find that it's one of the things I think that makes some of the tools more successful than other tools. Some of the platforms more successful. The ones that handle team collaboration and handle source code integration better, I think, are better adopted by organizations.
Thank you. How low-code applications developed with different platforms can be integrated with a particular EHR or clinical applications of a healthcare organization? Will there be a lot of comparability issues that need to be tackled?
No, there won't. And what I was trying to say in one of the slides, and I think I stumbled over it, so let me be more clear about it, is that chances are very good that you already have integrated, say you're a Microsoft shop, and your EHR is whatever, pick whichever one you're using. You have likely already done Microsoft-based integrations into your EMR, right, that pull data in certain scenarios in certain ways. Chances are very good that we can take that code or a version of that code and implement that in a low-code environment so that we're using essentially the same connector that's already been developed. Okay, because we're going to do those connectors, the integration connectors are going to be standard development process. We're going to have to change what the interfaces look like on either end, but the actual mechanism of working with the EMR, EHR, you've likely already solved in IT. And so as we put that integration in, we're not going to try to map directly to the data in the EMR. That's probably a failing approach. But working across the same API or the same integration that you're already using is probably a more successful one. And once we do that, it's going to look like integrating not with a data store, but integrating with an external system. Are there going to be compatibility issues and things we need to tackle? Of course. But they're going to look a lot like the same compatibility issues we have in a full code environment, where we pull data and we have date formatting issues or lookup issues and so on and so forth. And we're going to solve those really in the same ways we're going to solve them in a custom app development situation or scenario.
Thank you. You mentioned low code won't speed up requirements gathering and research, but are there ways to more quickly ensure your solution is customer centric?
Yes, there are, and some of this becomes very, very specific in what we're trying to, in the solution we're trying to solve, right? But yeah, we find in our experience, that the most rapid way to become customer centric is through consumer research, and I don't mean with that sending out surveys or enlisting a research company that's going to hire stay-at-home people. In our experience, the most effective ways to do this is to go to the facility, sit in the waiting room, and talk to patients as they come in, or find them as they enter the facility, and ask those questions, or pull together a group that we can use as a focus group and have these conversations to actually talk to people. As we do that, we find that we can identify some very, very interesting issues that consumers have with the process, with the way they engage, that we can't anticipate at all if we're sitting down in front of a just in front of a whiteboard and trying to imagine ourselves in their positions. So we find that consumer research is one of the very quickest ways to get there. Other ways to get there are journey mapping. And working through journey maps sort of in an iterative fashion. We don't necessarily need to solve the entire journey right away, especially if we don't know what the entire journey is. But we can start to solve the points that are important to getting implementation done, and then sort of fill in the gaps beyond that, either by research or by whatever mechanism we're using to gather customer insights. Fill in those gaps as we go, so that we can pace it a little bit better with the development process. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect, thank you. How do you maintain a consistency and experience with existing applications and systems? Any tips?
Yeah, this is hard because, as I mentioned in one of the slides, it's very, very likely that your organization already has a bunch of systems that are probably not consistent in their, in the experience. So really the challenge here is to figure out what that experience needs to be. And really I'm talking at the broadest level. What do I want people to experience? And, where am I as an organization on things like shared logins? Where am I as an organization, on things like separating, clinical and administrative interactions? Where am I as an organization on being allowed to use customer data? What are my PHI concerns and so forth? How permissive or restrictive is my compliance department? And so once we figure those things out, we can put together a larger strategy for how we're going to engage, sort of the guardrails, the guidelines for how we're going to engage these different roles in the different ways. And so you sort of concede at that point where the experience is going to be inconsistent. Once you do that, then you just have to slavishly work to make sure that they stay consistent within those buckets, that my clinical side interactions are absolutely consistent, and that my administrative side ones are absolutely consistent. And we won't get there all at once, short of doing a large rip and replace and pulling a lot of code out. So we have to get there bit by bit. We have to establish the platform, establish what some of those rules are in the platform, and then work towards them. And we're going to do that, like I think I used the word opportunistically earlier. We're going to look at what systems we can opportunistically move, ones that are undergoing heavy upgrades right now or have regulatory issues right now. Can I move those and then start to move towards that combined target?
Thank you. How does one prepare or transform a current legacy platform for low-code development?
How does one prepare or transform a current legacy platform for low-code development? That's actually, it's a good question. So the transformation that's going to happen, I think there's a couple levels to it. Number one, we have to understand where our data repositories are and whether those are going to stay in place or not. What integrations do I work with in this current legacy system? And do I still have access to that data? Am I going to need to port all the data or not and remodel it? So there's sort of that level of data discussion. And like I said earlier with the EHR and EMR, chances are, if we're going to be able to keep the data stores or keep the integrated systems, chances are good that some of the data or integration code that exists already can either be ported over or can be used to infer a lot of the data rules that we're going to set it up. So I've got sort of the data side of it. And then I've got the experience side, which most often does not get moved control for control or experience for experience. It seems most often, if we're moving a legacy platform, there's some reason we're moving it. And usually the reason we're moving it is that it no longer conforms to somebody's expectations. So we usually find that the front end portions, the interaction portions are being reconceived. And so, we kind of assume, or we can often assume that we're probably going to be rebuilding UI. So we're going to try to figure that data and integrations are going to stay as stable as possible, that UI and interaction is going to probably be redone, and that we're going to try to salvage the business logic in the middle as much as we can. And, one thing we find with legacy platforms is that, often there's a a low amount of organizational understanding of exactly what that logic is. So, we'll have to go through and document out, how the thing behaves. Sometimes we do that using test plans, sort of black box testing. Sometimes we do it with source inspection. Sometimes it's literally a business analyst going use case by use case by use case. But I think most of the work is usually found right there in the middle, is trying to make sure that we have organizational knowledge of everything this application does. Because, if I had $1 for every time we put a system in and somebody said, but the other one used to do it like this, I'd be a very, very rich man. There's a lot of work right there in the center. So I would make sure you understand the business logic would be my best advice there.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. What are your suggestions or thoughts to help us be proficient in low-code application development?
It's a great question. I would suggest that you take a look at the major players right now have systems where you can log in. OutSystems has a very, very nice ecosystem where you can simply download the tools. It will set up a free environment and you can start building things. And I always said earlier, don't start building things, but if you're a developer, start building things, right? Pull it down and start building something. Build a client satisfaction survey, build a inventory system for your, a scheduling system for your feeding your dog or whatever, build something, right? And I think what you'll find is that these tools are actually much more intuitive and much friendlier than you may expect. And, at least in OutSystems' case, and certainly in some of the other platforms' cases, there's a tremendous amount of documentation available that's meant to jumpstart you because, the vendors in this space recognize that you're only going to be fast and proficient with this if they can make you fast and proficient. And if you're not fast and proficient, your organization is not going to see value from it, right? So everybody is very well invested in making sure you can do these things quickly and smoothly. And I think you'll find if you haven't been in a low-code environment recently, or if you've never been in one at all, I think you'll find that these things adapt pretty quickly. Most of the vendors, OutSystems included, have training products, that you can get in and go through certifications much like you would in any other platform. But I think you'll find you'll be proficient very quickly because you're going to put logic together, you're going to put componentry together, you're going to modify UI, and then you're going to use code that you already know how to use to build the hard parts.
Great. Thank you so much. That concludes today's Health IT Security presentation. Special thanks to our speaker, John, our audience, and our sponsors, OutSystems and Paragon. Thank you and goodbye.